Okay, we're ready, Bezat Hashem?
Yes.
All right, Bezat Hashem. So today, Bezat Hashem, we're gonna we finished with Bishul last time before we switched over to Pesach, and before we move on to the next set of Menachot, so we said that the first 11 were everything that was involved with the making of the bread. The making of the lechem panim, it's called sidur hadepat. The next 13 menachot that we're going to learn is also one group, is those that involve the making of the curtains of the Mishkan. But before we go there, Be'ezrat Hashem, there is a very important concept that comes up and it's brought down in the Shulchan Aruch. When the Shulchan Aruch talks about it, he brings it down in the category of mevashet. In the category of cooking, and this is the topic of something that is prepared on Shabbat. Okay, so what does that mean? That means if someone does something on Shabbat be'isul, are you allowed to benefit from it or not? Okay, so it's called hana'a mima'aseh Shabbat, benefiting from something that was done on Shabbat. In general, the Shulchan Aruch, he says it like this. He says, if it depends if whatever was done on Shabbat was done on purpose or was done by mistake. If it was done on purpose, okay, then for the person that did it, let's say a person that cooks on Shabbat, okay, he cooks on Shabbat, and he did it purposely. This thing for him is now asur behana'a, so it's forbidden to benefit from it at all throughout the entire Shabbat and even after Shabbat forever. Okay, asur lo olamit. It's for him, it's asur forever. Meaning, if he decides to do teshuvah afterwards, his teshuvah is that he's never able to benefit from it. But acherim, others are able to benefit from it after Shabbat. Okay, if he does something by mistake, if he does it by mistake, then both for him and for other people, it's going to be mutal after Shabbat. But on Shabbat itself, it's not allowed. Okay, so if someone does a melacha on Shabbat, you are not allowed to benefit from this melacha, even if it was done by mistake. The exception for that is if it's something that is there's a machloket, there's an argument whether or not this thing is allowed on Shabbat or not. For example, we spoke about in previous classes about how if a person wants to heat up liquid on something that has liquid on Shabbat. So we said that in general for the Sfaradim it's not allowed. Okay, there were exceptions, and for the Ashkenazim, it should normally be okay if it's somewhat warm. So if someone were to heat something up on Shabbat, a Sfaradi who for him it's asur to heat up liquid on Shabbat, were to heat it up on Shabbat. Okay, so even though we said that if he does something asur on Shabbat, you're not allowed to benefit from it on Shabbat, since there are opinions that allow it, you would be allowed to benefit from this on Shabbat. Okay. Now there's a topic that comes up and a question that comes up many times is what happens when someone is bringing something to you on Shabbat when number one, there's either no eruv, like, so we're not talking about eruv like in Miami style. We're talking about, we're talking about something like that, where there's no problem of techum. There's no problem of going outside of the city limits. It just, if that happens not to be an eruv and they bring it. Or it's possible that they bring it by car, right? You have guests over for Shabbat. Unfortunately, they're going to come to your house. They're going to come to your house by car, which is a question in itself if you can invite them or not. But regardless, they come and they bring you a gift. They bring you a bottle of wine. They bring you some dessert. They bring you whatever it is, and out of respect, you want to serve whatever it is that they brought on the thing, but on the table. But the problem with that is that they brought it on Shabbat. So there was an isul done with whatever it is. The halacha for this particular one, and the case in particular that Ovadia Yosef brings down for this, is he brings down a case where you have soldiers outside in the field, right? You have soldiers that are standing watch, and they bring them the food. They heat up food for them on Shabbat, or before Shabbat they heat it up. It's hot food, and on Shabbat there's someone that comes with a car and drives it to the where the soldiers are staying in their outpost, whatever it is, and they want to know now, can they eat this hot food that was brought by car? So he says that you would be allowed to do it, meaning they would be allowed to eat this food that was brought on Shabbat. And the reason for that is, he says, is because there's a difference if the isul was done with the food itself, or the isul was an isul, but there's nothing that changed in the food. Okay, so in this particular case, there is nothing that changed in the food. The food, there had no melacha that was done with it. The food was heated up before Shabbat. The dessert was prepared before Shabbat. The bottle of wine, well, is the bottle of wine. There's nothing that's changing in the actual item that had the isul done with it. Just there's another isul on the side of carrying, of bringing through a car, bringing whatever it is. This Rav Ovadia says that it would be allowed to benefit from something like this on Shabbat, even though normally we say that you cannot benefit from something that was done a melacha on Shabbat. Okay. Next. This is a question that I've been asked as well, is can you take things to the mikveh on Shabbat? Okay, can you take can you dip utensils in the mikveh on Shabbat?
Or during Chag, is it the same, no?
Same thing technically. The simple answer, and it's a little bit more. The simple answer is like this. On Shabbat, the Shulchan Aruch says that you're able to do it, meaning there's no problem with taking the dishes to the mikveh to be able to use them on Shabbat. Okay. However, the Rama, the Ashkenazim say no. The issue that arises is not only taking the actual dishes to the mikveh. The issue that arises, if, for example, you want to dip it in the bay or in the ocean, right? So you have a different problem of not only the item itself, but you have a different issue of hotza'ah, taking things out from one reshut to another, because we know that the bay, even if it's a canal, all these places there, it's a different reshut, and you would not be allowed to uh, put it in and take it out of there. For the same reason that we said you're not allowed to throw bread into the bay or into to the canal on Shabbat, because you're taking it out from Lashut to Lashut. So you would have to be careful with that, which means that if you have in a shul, you have somewhere that there's a mikveh and there's no problem of Lashut, for the Sfaradim, you can technically dip it on Shabbat. For the Ashkenazim, you shouldn't be doing it. Okay. However, even according to the Ashkenazim, if it was done, okay, you shouldn't do it, but you did it. So then you would still be allowed to use the utensils. You would still be allowed to use the utensils on Shabbat, even though there was an isul done with it, because once again, the item. Sorry. So this one, the reason why you would do it is because since there is one opinion that allows it, even though for the Ashkenazim we say no, but since there's the opinion of the Shulchan Aruch that allows it, we would allow you to use it on Shabbat. Meaning to say that this whole isul, this whole problem of not benefiting from something that was done bi-isul on Shabbat is only if, would have a leniency if there's an opinion, even if it's not halacha, but if there's an opinion that allows it, okay, or there was no change done to the actual item. So those would be two conditions to allow something that was done be isu on Shabbat. Otherwise, in general, you would have to wait for after Shabbat, and depending on the situation, sometimes even after Shabbat, at least for the person himself, it would not be allowed. If a person has, and Bezat Hashem, hopefully we're gonna learn this maybe even today. We know that a person is not allowed to do laundry on Shabbat. You're not even allowed to spot clean. Okay, so if it's like a small stain, a small thing of grape juice, a small thing of oil stain, whatever it is, you're not able to clean it on Shabbat. Now, if a person goes ahead and does clean it on Shabbat, okay, so technically speaking, like we said, it shouldn't be, and they did it on purpose at least, it shouldn't ever be allowed to use it. However, in this case, since you have the ability to bring it back to the situation that it was before, if you bring it back to the situation that it was before, then and then you redo it, you would be allowed to use it. So I'll give two examples. One, for the first example of what is not a good example, and then the second one, which shows what a good example is. If I cook something on Shabbat, not me, if a person cooks something on Shabbat, whatever they cooked, you're never able to bring it back to the state that it was previously. Meaning, you're never able to uncook something on Shabbat. So, meaning, if you cooked something on Shabbat, there's no changing it back to what it was before. Therefore, it's always going to be so. There's nothing what to be done. If a person, like we said over here, they did laundry on Shabbat, okay, they they cleaned something that they weren't supposed to clean on Shabbat. There is always the possibility to get it dirty again and then to clean it again, which means that if after Shabbat you're going to make sure that whatever you did on Shabbat is worth nothing because it's dirty again and you're going to anyways have to wash it again. So then there are opinions, and there are opinions that would allow it. Okay. So in this case, in this particular case, even though it's something that normally, in a normal case, you would not be able to benefit from it ever again. However, if you brought it back to its original state and then you cleaned it again after Shabbat, you would be allowed to because you're not benefiting from what was done on Shabbat. Okay. These are things that come up sometimes in the kitchen, and these are things that happen, I'm sure, from time to time, at least. If a person does borel on Shabbat, okay, so we spoke about when we learned about borel, there are three conditions to be able to do borel. If they miss one of those conditions, if they miss whatever it is, okay, it's asu, it's borel, okay. So if a person takes out the bad from the good, no matter what the situation is, that's automatically borel. And like we said before, normally speaking, they should not be allowed to benefit from this on Shabbat at all. So if a person did borel on Shabbat, technically speaking, they're not allowed to benefit from this dish again. Okay. However, if they undo the borel, for example, they took whatever they took off, they put it back in. So you had a salad with lemon pits inside. Okay, you squeezed the lemon on top of the salad, and then there was some pits that were that fell out. You would be allowed to, you wouldn't be allowed to take out the pits. Okay, and if you took out the pits, technically speaking, at that point, the the salad is not, and you're not able to eat the salad on Shabbat because you did an isu with the food itself on Shabbat. However, what you would be able to do in order to be able to benefit on Shabbat from it on Shabbat would be to put back the pits. If you put back whatever pits you took out, then it's as if you didn't do anything on Shabbat, and then, well, again, the isul of borel unfortunately is there, but at least in terms of the benefiting from the plate, you would be allowed to benefit. You would be allowed to benefit from it because you didn't do any. You didn't benefit from the work that you did on Shabbat. Okay. All right. So those are the general rules when it gets to benefiting from something that was prepared on Shabbat. Now, Be'ezat Hashem, we're going to go to the to the next milachot. The next melacha is gozes. So like we said, the thirteen melachot that are coming up are involved with making the curtains. The first step to making the curtains was shearing the sheep, was cutting the sheep, cutting the sheep's wool. Okay, so the definition of gozes, is removing any part of a human or animal's body, whether it's alive or dead. This is going to be considered gozes. Okay,
Like
so
like a piece of nail, for instance?
very good. So that's going to be one of the things that aren't allowed. You're not allowed to cut your nails on Shabbat. You're not allowed to technically even bite your nails on Shabbat. Okay, um, the same thing applies for skin, right? If a person has dead skin or anything like that, you're not allowed to remove that on Shabbat. Here, Baruch Hashem, in Miami, it's a bit less of a problem, but in the colder countries, in the colder places, you sometimes have dried lips, right? And you have like loose pieces of skin, and sometimes it's very annoying. It's very bothering. On Shabbat, you would not be allowed to remove it. Um, However, if let's say the nail or the skin, whatever it is, the skin is a bit more of a problem. But if the nail at least is already the majority off, okay, the majority of the nail is off, then you can bishinu, you can take off the rest of it. Okay. Another example that I'm sure comes up many times is combing hair on Shabbat. Okay. Now, in general, to comb hair on Shabbat, I'm sure most are familiar with that it's not really allowed. Okay, for the simple reason that 90% of the time when you're combing your hair, there are hairs that are going to be pulled out. However, if it's a very wide comb, okay, and you're very careful that if you reach a knot that you don't pull it through, and you're not gonna get to the point of detaching the hair, then you would be allowed to do it on Shabbat.
But what's the purpose of brushing?
If you
If
don't
you don't, if
untangle.
you're not getting any knot, that doesn't make a,
So when I've mentioned this in the past, it's the purpose of brushing it sometimes is just to make it look more organized, right? Sometimes you have, I'm sure you've heard of the concept of a bad hair day,
No.
right? No, never
We
heard
get
of
a
it?
week, yeah.
Don't know what it is? Okay. So, so for those that don't know, it's when you wake up in the morning and your hair is literally all over the place, right? So mm, most people, they don't like looking like that. So what they do is they try to fix it up. And the easiest way to fix it up is obviously with a brush. Now, if you're going to use a brush, if you're going to use a regular brush, it's very likely that you're going to be pulling out hairs on with the brush, which is gozes, which you're not allowed to do. So yes, you can do it with your fingers. You can do it with like I said, like a wide comb where you're not, and you have to be careful not to pull out the hair. You would be allowed to do it like that.
I have a question for you. You mentioned whether it's alive or not alive. Is a wig considered like a part of human body?
Very good. I was going to get to that in a second.
Sorry.
So with a wig, it fits under a different category of minapets. Okay, minapets. We're also going to be learning about it, Bezat Hashem, very briefly. There's not much that nowadays that we do that really fits under that category, but there are opinions that don't allow it. Okay, so there are opinions that allow it. There are opinions that don't allow it, but it's definitely a lot less than hair that's attached to your body. Okay, um, yeah. Okay, so that's in terms of of combing here. Another thing that we have to be careful of is, let's say there's a band-aid. Okay, the person has a band-aid on their skin, bandage, whatever it is. You have to be careful that when you're removing this band-aid, you don't remove hair with it. Okay, because sometimes sometimes it's stuck onto hair, and we all know how painful that can be when you remove a band-aid like that. So if you feel that pain, you shouldn't be removing the band-aid on Shabbat, because when you're going to be doing it, you're going to be removing you're going to be removing hair. Another another very common form of gozes that arises is petting animals on Shabbat. Okay, so I don't think we covered this yet, but animals on Shabbat are muktzeh, meaning you're not allowed to lift up any animals. And this concept, there's uh, a very big misconception on the concept of muktzeh, which says that you're not allowed to touch muktzeh. Okay, you are allowed to touch muktzeh. The thing that you're not allowed to do with muktzeh is you're not allowed to move it. Okay, so if it's a round item, okay, if you touch it, you're automatically going to move it. So yes, you would not be allowed to touch a round item on Shabbat that is mukteh, because when you touch it, you move it. But if it's a stationary item, okay, so I'll give an example. Your phone is upside down, so there's no problem of you touching the screen and it might turn on. Your phone is upside down, and you want to touch the back of the phone for whatever reason, and nothing's going to happen. Obviously, you would be allowed to touch it. Okay, you would be allowed to touch muktzeh. You're not allowed to lift or move muktzeh. So when we say that animals are muktzeh, it means that you're not allowed to lift an animal on Shabbat. You would not be allowed to lift a pet dog, a pet cat. You'd not be allowed to hold birds. Again, if the bird flies on you, that's something else. You just, I guess, shoo it away and that's it. But you would not be allowed to carry the bird. Okay, carry the bird, I mean, even inside your own home, you would not be allowed to lift it. Okay, so the animals are muktzeh, you would not be allowed to lift them. What about petting the animal? Can you pet an animal on Shabbat? Like we said, as long as you don't move it, it should be fine. The problem that arises with petting animals is many times, or depending on the animal, also sometimes, if you pet an animal, it can shed hair. Okay, so you have dogs or you have cats that are known to shed hair very easily, and if you scratch them, you comb them, whatever, you pet them, whatever it is, you cause these hairs to come out. That is a problem. You would not be allowed to pet such an animal on Shabbat. You would not be allowed to touch it, because again, when you do that, you would cause um, you would cause you'd cause the animal to lose hair, and that's not allowed. It happens sometimes that you cook a chicken and you still see some feathers in the chicken. Now, we spoke about how if you can't remove hair or anything attached to an animal even after it's dead. However, if the chicken is cooked, okay, obviously not regarding the problem of boel, but if the chicken is cooked and you still see like some hairs and you want to remove it, technically you would be allowed to do it, as long as there's no problem of boel, which most of the time, at least for Ashkenazim, for sure, it's going to be a problem. For Sfaradim, there's less of a problem when it comes to boel and these type of things, with the klipa and the atzamot, with the peel and the bones. But for Ashkenazim, there is always a problem with that. So for them, there's nothing what to talk about. For us, Sfaradim, as long as there's no problem with borel, you can remove the feathers, um, even though it's still attached to the animal technically. Okay.
But that has to be done within a certain amount of time, like close to when you're eating.
Yeah, of course. Again, like we said, as long as there's no issue of borel, there won't be an issue of gozez with it. Okay, it's very possible to have an issue of borel without having the issue of gozez, but at least in terms of the isur of gozez, once it was cooked, there's no problem of removing it. Okay. Um, Removing scabs on Yom Tov, on Shabbat, sorry. Technically, it's
What is
It's-
it? Yeah.
The scab's like the piece that the blood forms
Ah,
together
une
to
croûte,
protect
comme
it.
ça?
Yeah, so you would be allowed to remove it technically on Shabbat. However, you have to be very careful that it shouldn't bleed. Now, if it's a fresh scab, if you're going to pick at it, it's for sure going to bleed. Another issue, just in general with scabs, of course, is when you remove scabs, it very often causes scarring. Okay, it causes a scar that's going to remain for a really long time. So it's not advisable to do it. But if it's something that is really itchy, it's something that bothers. Technically speaking, there's no issue to remove it, as long as you're not going to cause any bleeding. If you cause bleeding, then then again there's an issue of netilat neshama. You're not allowed to, or mefalek. You're not allowed to cause yourself to bleed on Shabbat, or even technically Yom Tov. Okay. Um, do you want to stop here, or should we continue
Maybe we can stop and then we continue next week with
with more people?
more people. Yeah, today was resuming after the Chag. It was difficult to get people